Now, over the years, I've had many students who feel very strongly about their religion, as well you should, and they sometimes approach me and feel that if they accept the scientific approach, they have to, they're forced to reject their religious views. Or alternatively, if somebody accepts their religious views, they have to reject the science and much of what science says. Let's take a look at 4 different philosophical approaches, at least a few of these. Now, these are philosophical approaches in terms of dealing with the whole broad question of both science and religion. In the first type of philosophical approach, it's known as Scientism. And Scientism is not really, quote, science, but it's a philosophical approach that all that exists in the universe is the physical or material reality that we are able to determine using the tools of science. And so it's very much a materialistic worldview. All there is in the universe is the physical reality. There's nothing spiritual, there is nothing supernatural. If we can't measure it, it doesn't exist. And obviously, in this philosophical approach, they reject anything divine, any creator, any God. There's nothing supernatural, and the universe has just kind of evolved on its own. You might say, okay, so isn't that what science holds? Well, this approach, this philosophical approach, still won't answer the questions of the universe. And let me just give you one example of a very significant question that this approach cannot answer. According to cosmology, a subject you learn about in astronomy classes, the origins of the universe evolved, or I should say the universe formed or originated, began about 15, 20 billion years ago. In fact, so what was the universe like 15 billion years ago? Where did it come from? Well, in fact, that's the ultimate question. According to the Big Bang Theory, the universe came out of nothing. There was an enormous amount of concentrated energy that appeared, and from this extremely concentrated source of energy, a tiny little speck, this energy started expanding outwards and cooling, and as the universe expanded, it cooled, and over time became the universe as we know it. All this energy cooled into matter, forming the stars, forming the planets, becoming the galaxies, and so on, all the celestial bodies. So a purely physical reality cannot explain where the entire universe came from, because basically it appears to have come out of nowhere, out of nothing. And it appears, and it's just been expanding ever since. And there's no indication, according to astronomers, that the expanding universe is slowing down in its expansion, that it's going to go and return back to its original point source of energy. At one time they used to think that was known as the pulsating or oscillating theory of the universe, but that doesn't appear to be the case. So the question is, where the heck did the universe originate? Where did it come from? Let's take a look at the opposite extreme, and that's number 4, Biblicism and recent creationism. This is a philosophical approach that says that we can explain everything using the Bible, basically. A particular Bible, because after all there are many Bibles, a particular Bible, the most common one that we're familiar with, that is used by Jews and Christians, gives a biblical account in Genesis of how a creator created the world in 6 days and then rested. In this Biblicism approach, there is a literal reading of the words. And of course, I might just add that typically, if you read the biblical account, you're probably reading a translation in English of something that originally was appeared or written in Hebrew. And one is taking these words literally. The world was created in 6 days. Each day lasted 24 hours. And the entire universe, as well as including the earth, are really only a few thousand years old. There's recent creationism. The problem with this approach is that if one takes this very literal account of the Bible, then one is forced to reject many facets or aspects of science. One has to reject the modern view of astronomers and cosmology as far as the Big Bang, that the universe is 15 or 20 billion years old. One rejects geologists, that the Earth is 6 billion years old, and that it has changed over time. And of course, biological evolution of life evolving on this planet over 3 or 4 billion years. Let's take a look at approach number 2, Theistic Evolutionism. Now, of course, this is very interesting in the way it's worded, because the word theistic is the same as the word theology. It means God. And evolutionism refers to an evolving world, where the world changes. In this view, basically, there is a creative force. You could say God, you could say some divine force, creates the world through an evolutionary process. We might just raise the following point. In the biblical account, God creates the world over 6 days. Now, I guess God could have created the world in 1 day. So isn't it possible that the fact that God is creating the world over 6 days is suggesting that there is a process by which the world is created? It goes through a number of series of steps in the way the world is formed. Now, in fact, as far as how long each day lasted, you can check your biblical account, the Bible, Genesis, and in fact, which day in the creation account are the sun and moon created? In fact, the sun and moon are created on day 4. You can check your Bible. So in fact, until the sun was created on day 4, there was no rising of the sun and setting of the sun over a 24-hour period. So we have no idea how long at least the first 3 days lasted. But in fact, even in the Bible, it suggests that days are not necessarily 24 hours. After all, the only being that in the Genesis account that is observing the world until man is created on day 6 is God, that's aware of what's going on. And in Psalms, Psalm 90, so David writes that in the eyes of God, 1,000 years in the eyes of God are as if it were 1 day. Obviously, an eternal creator, 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years, 1,000,000,000 years are like a moment in time to an eternal being. All right, so that's the theistic evolutionism approach, is that isn't it possible that God could have created the world over a long period of time through a series of steps? In fact, let's even think in the biblical account the order of some of the things that were created. On day 5, the creepy crawly things are created by God. These might include insects and so on. Also on day 5 are created the fish in the seas and the birds that fly. On day 6, in the Genesis account, God creates the wild beasts. Those would be the mammals, the lions and tigers and so on, and the domesticated animals, the cows and sheep. And then finally, at the end of the 6th day, who's created at the very end of the Genesis account? In fact, we are, people are. Now, in terms of the theory of evolution, that's pretty much corresponds with the same order in which things might be described, in which how they are created. There would be the creepy crawly insects, and then fish, and then birds, and then mammals. And we as humans are really one of the last things to have formed, evolved, appeared on this planet. So the order is really not all that different from the Genesis account. But I'd like to raise another question in terms of trying to address harmonizing, reconciling the Genesis account and religion with the scientific endeavor. We might ask the question, what's the purpose of science and what's the purpose of religion and reading the Bible? The purpose of science is to be able to explain how the world works, to be able to describe it in terms of scientific laws of physics and chemistry, to be able to predict what happens when you combine hydrochloric acid and sodium hydroxide. And when you mix them together, according to chemistry, it becomes salt water. To be able to understand how the heart works, and to be able to predict what leads to heart disease. To basically use science as a tool to find cures and treatments for illnesses and ailments and disease. To discover antibiotics and use them to prevent people from dying from infectious diseases, such as those caused by bacteria. To hopefully find medication and other treatments that will heal people who have cancer. That's the purpose of science. Now, what's the real purpose of religion and reading the Bible? The real purpose of the religion and reading the Bible is not to discover the mechanisms of scientific laws, to learn the details of history, to learn the details of geology, to learn the details of chemistry. Only in the Bible are we instructed, thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not cheat. Only in the Bible are we instructed of how to create a more moral society, a society where people treat one another, they treat their fellow man in a humane way. We're not going to find those directions, those instructions in any science book. Science, I'll remind you, is amoral. It can be used, scientific knowledge and scientific technology can be used for both moral and immoral purposes. So how do we know how to use these tools of science? How do we know how to conduct ourselves as people who treat one another in a caring way? We only find those instructions, those directions, by reading the biblical account, by reading the Bible, the stories in the Bible, the directions and commandments in the Bible is how we learn to treat one another. So perhaps the entire purpose of science and the entire purpose of religion really have different purposes. They're not in conflict with one another. They actually together allow us to understand the world and to live in this world and make this world a better place. That's how I would approach trying to accept science and what science can tell us. And of course, anything that science tells us is only tentative and may change over time in terms of our understanding. It is self-correcting. And the purpose of religion, the purpose of biblical study and reading these stories of the Bible is to learn from them and how we can be better people.